Thomas Bender is a specialist in heritage and architecture, listed buildings and large developments at Montagu Evans. Thomas, what impact do you think the new London plan is having on the location and planning of tall buildings? And we're right in the centre, of course, here of the city cluster. I mean, is it changing the attitude of planning authorities?
I think yes. I think it puts a lot of onus onto the local authorities because they are now in a position where they have to come up with some clear guidance for developers and everybody else to operate in. I think we're still seeing a lot of change. There are still loads of buildings in the pipeline and there's more to come. We need to understand how this can be organized better. But I think the big question we need to tackle is the quality of the tall buildings, which is something local authorities also have to consider quite drastically, and the GLA, of course, as well. So public space, quality of living, sustainability, zero carbon are the much bigger questions linked to how we're going to deliver those tall buildings, I think.
So, I mean, you've been involved with design review for a long time, and that may be an answer to creating better quality buildings. Have you seen the impact of design review since it was included in the NPPF, and can you give some examples?
I would hope so. If we don't see an immediate change, that also means, I mean, that's sort of linked to the fact that development takes a long time to go through the process. So many of the schemes we design reviewed at Cape and Design Council are still in the sort of construction phase. What is very important, and I think where design review plays an important role, is the ability to talk about architecture and placemaking in the process. So it's one of the rare opportunities to actually have a discussion about design, placemaking, and all the things that come with development, which is a unique thing. And it is quite interesting to observe how local authorities are very keen to listen to the design review panels and make their planning decisions dependent on what the panel says. So there's definitely a huge impact, and hopefully that also leads to better design. As an example, I think Nine Elms is actually quite an interesting part of the world where a lot of design review capacity and resources was spent on, with a lot of input from the local authorities, from developers, all the different stakeholders, to bring them together into one room and have a long debate about what makes the right sort of mixture of places around Nine Elms. And while maybe not every single building is of the highest design quality you would expect, at least the sort of idea of the linear park and Nine Elms as a road through this area, the river frontage, the connection between Vauxhall and Battersea Power Station, it does seem to come together as a new place that works. And I think had there not been this sort of drive to really review those places at the beginning, it may be a very different picture today.
So one of the other things in the London plan is greater accent on characterization. Do you think that is starting to placate local communities and, let's say, the NIMBYs, particularly in outer London?
Well, if the planning we've got a planning system in place, and if that works, it works really well. So there's loads of checks and balances in place to avoid bad development. And there's conservation areas and all sorts of other things that really help control sort of the spread of all sorts of things. And the NIMBY question brings us very quickly to consultation and engagement, which I think is a really important part of how we promote, talk, and illustrate and showcase new development. Of course, if you don't get the right information, you may be quite surprised about what's happening in your neighborhood, and we need to provide sort of the right information for people to understand that it's not automatically bad for them. There's a reluctance to change, which is some sort of fear of the future, and all that needs to be packaged up so that local people understand what's happening to their area. And then, of course, with good architecture, the right architects in place, you can achieve fantastic places that people then also like and enjoy.
You were involved in the Dagenham Green Master Plan for Peabody, and so there you've got Thamesmead across the river. It's huge development going on in let's say, far east of London. I mean, that's going to change the area massively. Is the sort of setup right? Is there enough infrastructure, which of course is one of the big problems with Thamesmead in the first place, wasn't it?
I think that's a really interesting point, and it shows the difference between north of the river and south of the river. Because when I went to Dagenham, or we had other schemes in Rainham, even further east, you really feel you are far away in the far east. However, on the south side, I never had that issue really. So I'm thinking of Woolwich now, which is fantastic in terms of accessibility. There is a very fast train to London. There's the DLR, there's the Elizabeth line coming now. So that makes a huge difference. And Abbey Woods Thamesmead is just basically 2 stops further out. On the Crossrail, it's only 1 stop. So hopefully that is going to make that distinction and enable people to feel more connected. But I think in addition to that, it really needs to have this sort of urban feel, and that's very difficult to achieve, or more difficult to achieve. So in terms of infrastructure, it could work, but it now depends on how to really create the right type of place. And again, to come back to Dagenham, there it feels much more disconnected. So it needs more to really make you feel part of London.
Yes, because of course Barking Riverside was held up for quite a long time, wasn't it? Because there wasn't really enough access to it. And then...
Hugely. I remember going there and you had to take a shuttle bus to Barking train station, and it just made it feel really convoluted and very unpleasant and cut off. And yeah, transportation is absolutely important.
And are there any other projects you're working on that you'd like to mention?
In terms of big urban extensions, well, we're working all over the place. There's a lot happening in the outer boroughs, which is really interesting. We have loads of stuff going on in the city as well, looking around us. So if we walked around our office here, we would see loads of the buildings, the schemes we're working on. In terms of heritage, absolutely fascinating to work in the city because we have these 2,000 years to deal with. And we are just adding another layer of architecture on top of that. So there's a huge responsibility, which again brings us to sustainability and sort of forward-looking. How are we going to do the right thing that is going to last and be enjoyed by future generations as well?
And the Mayor has shown some interest in the Carlos Moreno's idea of the 15-minute city. As planners, do you think that's a good idea? Does it fit into London? The polycentric nature of London, is it well designed for that sort of living?
Well, London is a special case because it's so big that it makes the 15-minute lifestyle really hard. I think smaller cities, the sort of the Copenhagens, the Basels and Strasbourgs in Europe are really quite comfortable for that reason, because you can have a really pleasant residential area, but you're still on your bicycle only 15 minutes away from all the exciting offers, from theatres to sort of bars in city centres. Whereas in London, with a polycentric city, it's very hard to compete with the West End and sort of central London. So I'm quite cautious about this idea of having loads of new sub-centres around London, because in the end, you still want to go to the West End. So for your daily activities, yes, absolutely important. You want to have all your local services within a short distance. You want to have the parks, the shops, everything else, friends ideally, cafes. Walking distance, perfect. Biking, yes, if we have the right infrastructure again in place, some safe cycle paths would be very helpful. So yes, that is possible, but on London level, you will still need to travel longer than 15 minutes to get the full benefit of living in a world city like this, just due to the size.
So we're working here in the City of London. The city is slightly different to the West End, it being much more of a business centre. How do you see that changing as a result of COVID and the increase in working from home?
That's an interesting point. We moved into this office only a year ago. Before we were in leafy Mayfair, sort of West End. So we had the experience of the 2 types of, well, central London. Mayfair is definitely far more vibrant in a way. The city has its own pace. It has definitely come back after COVID. Just going out for lunch break is fascinating. The amount of people is thrilling. I think coming in on the bus over London Bridge in the morning, we are basically back to what it was previously, even potentially more. So there's a huge sort of resilience across the city, and it is just very exhilarating and exciting.
That's very encouraging. And is that the case even on Mondays and Fridays? Because there is talk that a lot of the work week will be focused on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays.
There may be a little bit less, but still enough to make it feel like a very vibrant city. And on the other hand, the flexibility is fantastic as well. So having this ability to use the city the way we want it is very helpful, and we can all choose whichever way we want to live in the city.
Great. Well, Thomas, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. That was a pleasure.